G'day, Ben from Duck Plain Chicken here with a new build series. Back to the Macross universe, and this time something vintage. This is a 1/70th scale Valkyrie 3D factory Macross factory kit, and produced by Arii. And this kit was first produced back in 1983. I remember seeing these kits. There are actually a series of them. I remember seeing these kits when I was a young lad in a model shop, and I thought, how cool were they? They were sort of like a diorama in a box, you know. So there are 4 in the series, and when I was a young lad I bought the Gearwalk version, and I remember painting that with Humbrol enamels, brush painting, and I made a complete mess of it. And I was so upset about it because I loved the kit, but my paint job just didn't do it for me. So I'm looking forward to actually, doing these things properly. Well, at least to the best of my abilities I have nowadays. So these kits, nice small box. This of course features the VF-1S Valkyrie. And it's a little bit difficult to tell by the box art. This is the original box art, I believe, that would have come on the original kit. And so it's a bit hard to tell, but you actually get the Valkyrie, you get sort of vehicle, you get a couple of figures, a few missiles. The base does open up to reveal sort of the missiles in the floor, and then you get this sort of back piece. For me personally, the artwork on this is a little less inspiring than what the Revell Robotech one was, because at least that showed what the model looked like. But yeah, to give you an idea of sort of what these kits are about, if we look at the side, you can see what you sort of get. It's sort of like a very small sort of diorama of the Valkyrie sitting in the hangar bay, I guess, of the super dimensional fortress Macross. And then they show, if you get all of them, you can sort of line them all up. And having a look at the different ones you can get, here's the, the one we're building today. This is the Armoured Valkyrie. And so the Armoured Valkyrie is the VF-1A variant. We've got the Fighter version. Fighter is the VF-1D. And then we have the Gearwalk mode one, which is the one I had when I was a kid. So this is the VF-1J variant. So they give a good mix of the different variants and also the different configurations. So for me, this is a really cool sort of set of kits. Now, being that they are 80s kits, I expect them to be pretty rough as far as, the assembly and the moulding and all that sort of thing. But I think I might be able to detail up some stuff, might be able to modify some things to make it a little bit cleaner. So, without further ado, let's have a look at what's in the box. Now, I've already taken the parts out of the bag. They come in one sealed plastic bag. Let's have a look at some of these sprues. First of all, the Valkyrie. Now, this is a kit of the 80s, so it does have the level of detail you would expect, which is not a lot. But it's reasonably clean. There's a little bit of flash here and there. And of course the style of these models back in the day was sort of 2 halves that are glued together, which is not ideal, but I still think that a lot of the models that came out in the 80s for Macross and released under Revell Robotech line were some of the coolest sci-fi kits of the day. So I was completely infatuated with them as a kid. We've got the legs here. They're sort of just single units. There's no articulation on these or anything. So we've got the head and the head side cannons, the gun. So all the main sort of details are there. There's not a huge amount of sort of panel line detail or anything like that, but I think it's good enough for the scale. There was a larger version of this kind of idea of a Macross Hangar, which was released, and it was 1/100 scale, so it was quite a bit larger than this. I also have that in my stash, so one day I'll get around to building that as well. Anyway, that's the Valkyrie, and so pretty simplistic kind of kit. I suspect all the time I will be putting into this will be the cleanup of the seams. I think that's going to be the main, the main body of work. Now if we have a look at these other sprues, these are all sort of related to the hanger. So you can see this is the back wall. So you kind of get some details, you know, like big, these almost look like big CRT monitors. There's some rails that I believe the observation box sort of, or the crane hangs from. And then you get the base, which is really kind of cool. It's got a couple of doors that sort of open up to, you know, you have a couple of these missiles sort of stored in. It comes with a like refueling vehicle, looks like some sort of tanker, you know, with wheels and what have you. Got some TV screens here, and then you've got this sort of, it's like a crane that runs on rails, so you've got the observation box for that. Now you don't get any clear parts for this, but I do have an idea of what I'm going to do for that. So looking at the other sprue, you get these rails which sort of help build the structure, the rest of the structure, you know, as gantry and that sort of thing. You also get a couple of figures, so you get these 3 figures. Now I suspect they're not ones. They're not 1/170th scale. I think they're a little bit larger than that. But anyway, it's, you know, it's a quaint kit in the fact that they actually packed a lot into a very small, affordable kit. And I know for me, you know, it really captured my imagination and really helped to get me into sort of sci-fi modeling as a kid. So these kits are really cool. Now if we look at the instructions again, sort of a product of their time. You know, they sort of show, they've got the colour call outs, and but they show all the parts painted on the sprues, which, you know, was something that I think people used to do a lot more of than these days. So they sort of give you the indication of the colours. Got a nice little illustration there of what it looks like. And on the back here, this is probably the coolest bit. They actually show you a photo of it all painted up. And given the scale of this kit, I think it's pretty spectacular, the sort of detail they've packed into it. I would really love to see a modern remake of these kits for Macross. That would be awesome, but I think I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But here you get a really good idea of what the other 3 sets look like, you know, when all 4 of them are sort of all lined up and they click together, they sort of connect together. I don't know how well that sort of works. And then of course we've got the this decal call out for the Valkyrie. There are some decals that go on the hanger part, which they don't sort of show here, but we'll cover those in a minute. And then looking at the instructions, you've sort of got, you know, pretty much 2 steps and you've built the Valkyrie. It's not that complex. You know, you put the gantry in place for the hanger, the little crane box, the little vehicle, and then again it shows you how you can stack them up, and they say you can even stack them on top of each other, you know, if you wanted to build a whole, you know, sort of hanger full of these things. So that's cool. Let's have a look at the decals. First of all, we get decals for the Valkyrie. So thankfully these are water slide decals. Now, given that this kit is from the late 90s, I suspect when this one was popped, I'm not holding much hope on the quality of these decals. I suspect they're going to be maybe a bit problematic, maybe a bit brittle, but we'll see. But it's nice that they include those decals for the Valkyrie. You also get these additional decals, which I suspect are for the hanger itself. So if you wanted to sort of put some decals on the hanger, you can. We'll just double check the instructions to see if they do include. Yeah, I can't see any reference to sort of decals at first glance, so I'm not sure whether they just yeah, they expect you to kind of, I don't know, I mean these decals might have even been put in for the 15th anniversary version of this kit. They might not have been the original 80s kit, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, first bit is get these pieces out and start gluing these halves together ready for seam cleanup. Okay, I've cut out all the parts for the Valkyrie, and boy, this kit needs some love. I think the molds are very tired. There is a lot of rough marks on the plastic, which, to be perfectly honest, I'm not actually sure if it's damage or if it is actually molding, but I suspect it's actually the molding. So if we have a look at the gun, for example, if it'll focus, I'm not sure if you can see that, but that is a rough surface on that gun, really rough. And there's other areas on the kit where it looks like the molds have worn a little bit or shifted in places. So this kit does need a lot of love, but and you're probably thinking, why would I bother with taking an old kit and spending all this time, investing a whole lot of time on it, when you've got so many new kits to look at? For me, it's a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously nostalgia, but also, if I can get one of these kits looking really good, it's the challenge that really, that I really appreciate about working on these old kits. And yeah, I think it's just doing something a little bit different. Sure, it's nice to have a brand new Bandai or Hasegawa kit or Tamiya kit, where everything fits beautifully. But having an 80s kit, it's like different time, different technology, and some different issues to face. So I didn't pay a lot for these kits, so it's not like I invested a lot of money in them, but that's kind of the reason why I like them. So I'm going to talk about the assembly of the Valkyrie. It's a pretty simple affair, and it's definitely going to need some modification. There's no doubt about that. So, but to show you some other problems with this, with these pieces, we have a look at the arms that I've just put together, the two halves. You can see that gap there. That piece is bent right out, and that's not damage from the box or anything. That's actually an issue with the mold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to douse this in hot water and see if I can sort of push it back into shape. One thing I've noticed about cutting and sanding this plastic, it's incredibly soft, softer than even sort of Bandai plastic. So I think I'll need to be pretty careful about what I put on it. I suspect enamel products might be a bit of an issue, but anyway, yeah, so that, that's an issue on that one. It's not an issue on this arm, I don't think. So yeah, that's kind of what it should look like, when it matches up reasonably well. There is a bit of a step there. All these things have a bit of a step on them, so it is going to require some serious sanding. But if we get the two arms together, the body is sort of made up of a couple of pieces, and essentially you have these holes that match up with the these sort of connectors here. So you put the head in. I don't know how well it's going to sit there, and then each of the arms, if I lay this down, it's sort of like try to get everything lined up and then clamp it all in place. And so then the back goes on and holds all this together. Now the fit is not flash. There are some sort of serious seams that I'm going to have to deal with. But if you sort of look at the arms, they kind of just flap around the breeze. So I think yeah, I think I'll need to do something about that, because they might stiffen up a bit after a bit of paint, but at the same time I think it's going to be easy to clean the seams if I have the arms, so that I can sort of just take them out and do them individually, do the body individually, and try and work around that way. Okay, so that's the upper sort of torso. The back unit, that's got a couple of detail pieces that go on. Just checking the instructions, which way they go. They sort of slot in there. And then this big peg on the back here sort of goes all the way through. Sort of holds everything together. kind of works, you know. But again, these arms are a little bit floppy. Okay, now we do have the side cannons on the head, which is nice. So sliding, I'm not going to push them in all the way, but you get the idea. I think I might trim those pegs a little bit. And then we've got the legs, and these are going to need a lot of work. So you can see for a start at the top here, we've got a big gap there that needs to be filled. And I know from experience of working on other 80s kits, when you've got two halves like this, trying to get those lines, those panel lines sort of, well, actually I think it's supposed to represent intakes. Yeah, getting those lines lined up once you've sort of dealt with the seams is really problematic. So I might end up sanding those down or cutting that away and doing something else to fix that up. I don't think these ones are going to be as much of an issue. I think I should be able to clean those up alright once, but you know, I think I'll have to do some rescribing of panel lines and what have you. The sort of core detail is all there, you know, all the sort of main bits of the legs, but you've got no articulation. There's no knee joint or anything. It's literally just a peg that slides on. And I kind of wish they had done this for the arms as well. It would have made life a bit easier. Look at the two legs. They sort of slide in there. And you do, you know, of course, get the gun, so it's, I mean, it's good that they provided that sort of detail. Your legs aren't going to hold together particularly well because I've trimmed the pegs. Alright, but, you know, there we go. That's pretty much the Valkyrie figure. For this particular part of the arm where the part has become distorted and I need to close up that gap, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some freshly boiled water in this container here. I'm going to have this all set up with clamps, because if I put the clamps in there, you can see it does start to close it up. But I reckon that dunking this all in hot water will help to make that work a bit better. Okay, so I'm just going to dunk that in. And hopefully the heat from the water will be enough to sort of make the plastic a little bit more pliable so that those gaps come together. Now while waiting for that, all the rest of the pieces, I have sort of glued the two halves together, so you can sort of see the I put plenty of plastic cement in there. I used this stuff. I didn't use, to me, extra thin. This stuff's nice and thick, and you know, some people say, you know, prefer not to do gap filling this way, but for me I find it easier. So if I put plenty of glue in there and squeeze the bits together, you see the molten plastic come out of that gap there. Now the problem with this is it does take a long time to dry, so you really need to leave it for a good week or so before you start sanding it, because the cement, when it mixes with the plastic, on small bits it's fine, it'll sort of just, you know, glue and weld the styrene together. But when you've got a whole lot of molten sort of plastic, it does take a long time to dry properly, to the point where you can sand it. I mean, the alternative is you use like Tamiya putty or something like that to deal with the seams. Alright, so we'll pull this out and see if I just let that cool down for a while, and we'll see how that works. I'll be back in a tick. Alright, after a couple of goes, that gap has been closed substantially. There's still a gap there, but it's nowhere near as bad as what it was. So I think my idea of sort of using hot water has worked, and I reckon now I might give it one more shot so I can close it up any more, but I think now the glue will be able to hold it once it's sort of all clamped in place. It was just too much before. I thought it's going to be fighting so hard to kind of hold it together. So yep, I think that worked. So I've been trying to work out a way to essentially set up the arms so that they will just plug in, that I don't have to sort of seal up the two halves of the abdomen with the arms sort of locked in place. Just before I go any further, I just want to show you the the seam after, you know, I had it bent and everything. So it's still a bit out of shape, but I reckon once I've sort of sanded that up and cleaned it a bit better, it'll be okay. But yeah, getting back to the shoulder joint, so I really don't want this kind of locked in mechanism. Now, I've been playing around with it, and the first thing that I did was sort of cut off the disc part around here, just to see if it would sort of plug in. And it kind of works, but it falls out way too easy. So, you know, it sort of makes it easier to remove the arm from the torso. But yeah. So what I've had to do is install a magnet on this side, and if I get the other half of the torso, you can see what's going on. So I've got a couple of magnets I've already stuck in place. It's really hard to work with magnets sort of you know, while the camera's rolling, so I apologise. And I was doing a bit of experimentation. I thought if worst comes to worst, I can break all this off. These are 5mm by 5mm by 5mm magnets. They're just super glued in place. This bit of plastic you see in the middle here, that's just to keep them from, you know, connecting back up again. But if I take this arm, you'll see that it'll actually hold there in place. Now it's on a bit of a angle at the moment, but once I get the other piece clamped on top and glued in place, it should hold there pretty well. There's a couple of sort of issues that I've found with that. First of all, if I take this bit of plastic off, so you can just see the two magnets there. So if I take the back piece and sort of install that, so that sort of locks in place with that peg. So I need to, if I try to join this other piece, the magnets are actually preventing it from closing up properly because of this corresponding hole. So what I need to do is trim that. I need to trim it quite a bit. It might look messy. I'm just trimming it down so that way it doesn't interfere with the magnets that are already in place. So now let's see how that sort of joins up. Alright, let's see, that's better. Okay, so now that closes up. Of course the seams will be dealt with once I've glued it, but the first part of this is all about just sort of getting it ready, working out how I'm going to connect it. So if I take this shoulder now and plug it in, it actually holds in there quite firm, and it doesn't sort of, you know, give that good shake. It does pop out if you need it to. If you just plug it in, rotate it, it'll be fine. And just to check the strength of it, we can put the gun in its arm. Let's see, I can take the arm off willy-nilly, put that in place, and it will now hold the gun. No worries, that's not sort of flapping around anywhere, it's not going to fall out. So I'm pretty happy with that solution. So I'll show you how I did that with the other arm. So take some nippers and cut off this disc bit that's around the edge. So I don't want to cut the post itself, just the disc sort of part of it that hangs around the sides. Now I should say this glue is not fully cured yet. The styrene cement, but for this particular process it's not too much of an issue. I just need to be a bit careful when I'm drilling it. And so what I'm doing is I'm sanding down the peg just a little bit, just to clean up where I cut those pieces off. Okay, so now I can check. Yep, so that fits in there, but it's quite loose. Like it's just, you know, popping in and out, whereas the other one is, you know, quite tight. So that just sort of shows that the first step I did was just to see if I could cut that disc off and see whether it hold in place, but it doesn't. So the next step is to drill a hole down the center of this peg and get a 1mm diameter by 2mm length magnet in there. Just put a center punch in here, start the way to start the drill bit. It's reasonably centered, and then I'm going to take a 1mm drill bit and very gently drill this out. And the reason I'm going gently is because I'm aware that the glue is still sort of setting up, so I don't want to sort of separate the two pieces while I'm drilling it. I want the drill to do all the work. Okay. Now the next thing I need to do is sort of check the polarity of the magnet here on the other side. So I know that if I pop this magnet in here, I don't think I even need to put any glue in there. I think that'll hold just fine. Okay, so just to double check. Yep, that's I can feel that magnetic force on that. So at the moment it's sort of dragging it onto the magnet, but once I've got the two halves sealed, that should hold in place reasonably well. So let's button this up again and see what the result is. Yep, and look at that, turns beautifully. We now have two arms that are posable. They hold in place pretty well. They're not moving around. And the advantage is that I can now take these off easily enough and paint them up separately from the torso. Now the next bit is the head, and I'm going to do the same sort of thing. So I've already cut off the disc part of the head, but I need to again just sand lightly the rough bits off. Now if it doesn't work for the head, I'm not too fussed, because the head I'm quite happy to sort of glue in place. It's not like it really needs to be you know, posable or anything. It's sort of a nice to have, but not a necessary thing for me. So we're going to give this a shot, and if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so I've put a magnet in the peg for the head, and I'm just going to throw a little bit of CA in there and get this all buttoned up again and see how well this all works. Alright, let's see what we got. Look at that. The head stays in there just fine. It's posable. It does lift up a little bit, but it's not that bad. But his head doesn't, you know, doesn't drop out. That seems to be holding in place quite nicely. So now if we just check all the details, yep, that all holds in place. For the legs, of course, it's not an issue, just because they are they're on, you know, bolts and corresponding pegs, so that's fine. There we go. Okay, onto the hanger, and while I was trimming out all the parts and cleaning them up, just a note that these pieces are really rough. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done, so don't expect a really clean kit if you manage to get your hands on one of these things. So there's a few bits I've got to fill and sand and all that sort of thing, but I'll worry about that at a later date. I just want to sort of show you how it sort of all goes together. So first of all, we have the floor, and there's these little clips on the side, and they correspond to these on the other side. So where you have multiple of these, they sort of clip in together so they all line up in a row. So we've got some doors that go on the go into the base here. Now I did trim these pegs down just a little bit, just so that I'll be able to get them in and out, but they do sort of open and close. This one's probably a bit loose, but that's alright. Let's see how we go with this one. Yeah, okay, this one it's not sitting super flat. I suspect that it's warped in some way. I don't think there's anything trapping it or stopping it. I think it's just, yeah, the bit's warped. So I've got to see if I can sort of flatten that out a bit. But it's kind of nice they include this, you know, this detail. I didn't have to. It could be just a, you know, just flat floor. But the fact they've sort of thought about including something like this is kind of nice. Then we have, I think this is what makes up the front, if I remember rightly. So we've got these sort of two struts. There's one that's got a little kink out the side, so you just need to make sure you get that around the right way. And then we've got these pieces across here. Yes, even these holes and everything are a bit, yeah, you're doing. So I'm not sure how well this is going to sort of just, you know, push fit together. You definitely need glue for the final assembly, but I was kind of hoping I could get a bit of it sort of pushed, press fit. May hold just enough. So I'll put that to the side for now. Then we have the wall piece. Now the wall piece is, you know, it's got some greeblies on it. I love these old sort of CRT screens on it, but it's got, you know, at least a little bit of detail there you can dress up. And, you know, when I look at this, I kind of think, oh, do I want to build this thing out of the box, or do I want to sort of see how far I can kind of push it? So I think I might go somewhere in between. I might, you know, I want to do a little bit of lighting on this kit. I think there's some sort of other areas where I might be able to detail it up a little bit better, but we'll see. The other thing to note on the wall is there is this clip on the side, so you don't want to sort of cut that off because that corresponds to the hole on the other side. So again, where you've got multiple of them, you can sort of hook them all into each other. Alright. So we have this detail piece here. Now this is the rail that the observation deck or crane or whatever it is, here's what to. Yeah, so the observation deck sort of slides along this rail here. And then we have this sort of walkway and this very ordinary rail detail, and the amount of flash on this thing was just ridiculous. I've had to try and clean it up. Still needs a bit more of a clean up, I think. So we're surprised this actually fits in the holes properly. So there's sort of 3 connection points. It's sort of holding in there, but not really. Yep, that one definitely doesn't want to go, but anyway, we'll get the you'll get the idea. There are these 2 tiny little pegs here that correspond to holes in the back of the wall. Not sure how long they'll last, but you kind of get an idea. You know, there's a bit of a walkway there that you can get the figures on. Okay, they say to join it up onto the floor. So there's a sort of piece on the bottom here that corresponds to the slot on the bottom. It seems to go in reasonably well. Probably will need some glue to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And then we have let's see, the assembly we made just before. I'm going to try and get this so it doesn't fall apart. And then we have the gantry on the top, which is made up of these two pieces, and there's a this rail bit that sort of joins them up. It's all pretty loose, which is alright because that's what a bit of glue will fix. But kind of get an idea, hopefully, before it falls apart on me. I might use a bit of glue tack, just a bit of blue tack, just to hold it in place. Actually, that might be an idea. Because I really want you to get an idea how neat this thing is. You know, as far as compared to so much other stuff that was in the 80s. You know, look at that. That's a pretty convincing sort of hangar, you know, / workshop bay from the SDF-1, whatever you want to call it. It's really cool, I reckon. Alright, so let's look at some of the other details. Okay, the next thing, I'm definitely going to have to use blue tack here to hold this thing together. So this is the, I don't know if it's a, it's not really a crane, it's got spotlights on it. So I think it's just an observation deck. The other thing, thinking about this, I was thinking of doing maybe sort of a bit of an interior, but because the rail part of it goes across the back, I'm not sure if it's really worth it, so I might have to do something else for the windows. I'm definitely going to add some clear pieces. I think I might end up sort of tinting them or something like that. I don't think I'll do a sort of a full interior. So that's kind of what it looks like. What I might do is get, now there's these spotlights. I don't think these are going to sort of hold together without glue, but essentially they're made of a backing piece and the front piece here. But I'm almost tempted to try and light these things and actually use the backing bit as sort of just a spotlight. But anyway, these have like little arms, if you like, that will hold them in place, and then they plug into the observation deck. So there's sort of one that hangs at the bottom here. Don't know how well that's going to hold. No, it's not going to hold in there. But anyway, there's essentially one that comes from underneath, and there's one that hangs on the wall like that. Anyway, put that to the side for a minute. The next bit is the tanker. So the tanker is made up of sort of two halves. And then there are end caps on it. They go in like that. Okay, so they're definitely going to need glue. They're not going to hold in there, that's for sure. And then they have these wheels, which is like one is got the axle attached. And the other one supposedly plugs in here. I don't think it will. No, it doesn't look like it. So let's just get that side on. So these other wheels, they sort of plug onto here, but I think I need to drill out the holes a bit more. But anyway, you get an idea of sort of what the tanker kind of looks like. So it's a nice kind of touch. Then you get sort of two missiles. I've already sort of built one just to sort of show you what they look like. So there's sort of interesting kind of configuration. And so they come in two halves, but they don't have any corresponding pegs or anything on them. So you sort of just line them up, and then there's like an end piece on one end, and one on the other that sort of holds it all together. So it's kind of an interesting way of doing it. There we go. There's the missiles, and the last component of the figures, and this is probably the somewhat weakest part of the kit, I think. These figures look a bit too big to me, so I'm not sure. And they do, I mean, you know, they look like figures. They're fine, I guess. They've got a surprising amount of detail on them, but I'm not sure about the scale of them. Now, they won't stand by themselves, but that's something that I can address later. And so you get 3. This character is like super chunky, you know, just compared to sort of one of the other ones. You can see there's massive size difference. Now, obviously, one, you know, the guy on the left is supposed to be male, and the other one's a female, but it's like they went overboard with making the male sort of a lot bigger. So anyway, you get 3 figures. Yeah, so you kind of get an idea of you know, what's going on there, and of course once you've got, you know, the little tanker on there, and of course the figure will sort of sit in there like that. So it's a nice sort of scale, and yeah, like I mentioned before, really captured my imagination when I was a kid. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this, but it is going to be a lot of work. I've got a lot of parts cleanup to do. There's a lot of sort of things like you know, ejector pin marks that you can see on the external parts. So I want to sort of deal with those. Why they couldn't have put them on the inside, I've got no idea. But anyway, they're there, so I'll need to deal with them. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of cleanup. I think that's where most of the time is going to go with this particular project. So bear with me while I spend a bit of time cleaning parts up. I've started to clean up a lot of these pieces, and just a warning, because it is an 80s kit and I suspect the molds have seen better days, there is a lot of filling you need to do and a lot of cleaning on these pieces. Thankfully it's not a huge kit, so it's not like there's millions of pieces to clean up, but just so that you're aware if you want a nice clean sort of model at the end of it. So what I've been doing is, you can sort of see for some reason this girder here was just full of ejector pin marks on one side. So to fill those, I use Tamiya white putty. So this is sort of the finer stuff, and it starts off just looking like that, just blobs put on there, and then I'll go through and sand it, and you can sort of see yeah, it cleans up nicely. Now, I've only done the first pass. The one problem with this putty is it does shrink, so you've actually got to do a second pass, because some of these you know, have got dips in them that need to be addressed. Alright, like on the doors that go in the floor, there's ejector pin marks. Now it's worth filling these, just because if you do have it displayed open, they will be seen, and they're pretty obvious. And even on the outside of the observation deck, they've got these ejector pin marks here, which is really not flash at all. I don't think, they don't look as though they're sort of supposed to be part of the moulding. They don't look as though they're supposed to be, you know, lights or anything like that. They do look like ejector pin marks, and there's no ejector pin marks on the other side. So for some reason they've chosen to do it on the visible side, which is not flash, but anyway. Okay, now where most of the work is going to happen is on the Valkyrie itself. So anyone who's worked with older kits, you will know that normally when you have two pieces, two halves that join together and you get a seam, that if you're lucky enough to have pins and holes that line up, sometimes you'll still get a step, what's called a step, where the two pieces sort of, they don't actually connect like that. They sort of have this step when they join. Now, thankfully in this kit, the stepping is not severe, but there is a little bit of it occurring. You can probably just see it on the top there. Maybe not, it's a bit hard to see. but the rest of it's not too bad. However, the seams are shocking. I've got a lot of glue in here that I need to clean up. And normally when I'm sort of cleaning up seams and stuff, I'll use, sanding sticks, or even files in some cases where it's really nasty. But the problem with doing that for something like this, like a full sort of limb, is that you'll start to soften the detail a lot more, like soften the edges, and I really don't want that for these because the details are pretty soft as they are, so I don't really want to soften them anymore. So the process I use, just so that you can sort of see it before and after, but the process I use is with a blade, with a hobby knife. So this is the before I've done sort of any work on it. You can see it's very clearly got those glue seams. And then if I bring up one that I've done, you can see the sort of difference there. So there is very little trace of the seam of the two halves being joined together, but I'm still getting, a sharp sort of sense of the detail. So I haven't sort of, sanded all the corners so that they're all soft. Now, the only thing that I have had to shave off is the intakes at the top here. So you can see on this one I've cleaned up. I've actually taken that down to the base sort of plastic, taken out all the detail. And the reason for that is because it's actually really difficult to sort of clean up that seam and retain those lines properly and cleanly. So I've got another idea of how I'm going to essentially reconstruct that intake so it's a little bit cleaner, but that'll come a bit later. The process I use for cleaning this up, and we'll start on the back side, is literally take your hobby knife and using the, keeping your blade horizontal to the surface, you literally just scrape away. And you want to keep your blade as flat as possible to the surface. And the advantage of doing that is that you'll get a nice clean surface, and you'll get that glue bead that was there taken off nice and cleanly. It's also somewhat quicker than sanding, because normally when you're doing sanding sticks you have to sort of go down in grits, or go up in grits I should say. You'll start with a really coarse one and then you'll go down finer and finer. With a knife you're actually creating quite a smooth surface from the very beginning. If you have a look at, I'll try and get it in light so you can sort of see. There we go. So you can see just between this bit here and this bit, there's substantial difference. The other thing is that it's, even though this is white plastic, it's often hard to see, but sometimes you can catch a glimpse of the glossy glue that's sort of still in a recess, so you need to sort of scrape it back even more, because what you want is sort of almost a matte surface, a consistent matte surface across where you're scraping. And that way you've got the plastic all down to the same level. So it's a little sort of shiny bit, so I know that there's a dip there and I need to keep scraping. Now, using, whether you're using this process or sanding with sanding sticks, it's always in the very depths of the recesses that you will see where a joint is, where you've sort of missed it, because it's difficult to get in there with sanding sticks and what have you. So just be conscious of that you really need to sort of take your time. And of course that's something that I haven't done in the past. I really should have spent more time cleaning up the pieces, and given that it's white plastic it is somewhat difficult to see, so I'm going to give it a good pass, getting rid of the seams, and then I'll prime it in grey, because of course that will give us a better idea of areas that I've missed that need to be puttied up or sanded back. So the other thing is on the arms, these arms, so here's one that I've done. There's sort of no sign of that seam that goes down the middle. This one is a bit tricky because you've got this area in here where it's a bit difficult to get a knife in, but you can do it. You know, if you've got just sort of a, I mean, mine's to me a hobby knife, but if you use a scalpel or, you know, most knives should be able to get in there. So you can sort of see the difference between this one, which I haven't done yet, and see how appalling that seam line is. But that's all right. That's the thing with these older kits, they're all sort of built on a similar pretense. Two halves, stick them together. So, you know, a bit different to sort of modern kits where they, in the engineering, they do a lot more to sort of deal with hiding seams. But for me, you know, doing these old 80 kits, that's part of the challenge of the build. You know, they're a lot simpler, they have a lot less detail, but they have a different sort of set of challenges, and one of them is how to deal with these really obvious seams in the kit. Okay, so anyway, I'll go ahead and finish the cleanup. You don't need to see me sort of scrape down all this stuff. One of the problems of scraping back the seams, or even if you're using sanding sticks, is the potential to lose your panel lines. Now this one isn't too bad, but the one on the foot is starting to sort of disappear. So I use a scribing tool. This is a FlexiFire one, but you know, to me it makes one. There's a whole lot of different types out there. So you probably will have to go back and re-scribe, you know, some of the panel lines. Now I like this particular tool just because it's actually got a blade edge along there, and you can sort of run that through your panel line first, and then you can use the hook part to gently scrape out that panel line. Now thankfully these panel lines are pretty straight, so they're easy to clean up. A little bit hard to see on camera there, but certainly better than what they were. And to go in and give them a bit of a clean up. So reasonably stiff bristled brush, and I might even run a little bit of to me extra thin in there. That'll help sort of clean it up a little bit too. Alright, so those panel lines at least will hold a panel wash a little bit better. And there's some other areas where the panel lines have sort of got really shallow through the poor moulding or whatever, so I'll probably need to rescribe those as well. Still working on the cleanup of these pieces. There's a couple of things I want to do here. First of all, there's this little triangle device here that's sort of inset on the shoulders, and I think I've checked the decals and I don't think the triangle is the same size, so I think I might actually just fill those in. So for that I'm just going to use some, again, some white Tamiya putty. So I'll just get a little bit of that on a toothpick, and like the other sort of filling jobs I've done on these pieces, I expect that it will shrink, and I'll need to apply probably another coat to it. Another little detail I've done is just drilled out the end of the gun. It's actually sort of just solid in there, but it'll look a bit better once it's drilled out. So drilled that out. Some of these gaps that I've got, or some of the, you know, I've sort of started sanding this one, and the filler I haven't put sort of enough in there, so it's starting to, you can sort of see the areas where it's not looking great. And I think these are pretty shallow, so I think what I'll end up using is Mr. Surfacer 500. So I tend to find this stuff's really good for doing filling gaps that are quite small, quite shallow I should say. And the reason for that is because if you use the Tamiya putty on really thin or really shallow sort of gaps, you'll find that when you start sanding it, it'll actually just come out of the gap that you're trying to fill. Whereas this stuff will actually hold a little bit better in the shallow gaps. Okay, so I'll let that dry for a good day or so before I start sort of sanding that. Okay, it's time to address the intake, which at the moment looks way too plain and is not representative of what a Valkyrie looks like. So for those of you unfamiliar, this is the when the Valkyrie transforms into its jet fighter mode. These are basically the intakes that are sort of sit underneath the wings. So before there was just these sort of line details, which, as I mentioned before, when you glue these two halves together, it's very hard to match them up. And I wanted something that was a little bit more interesting than just some straight sort of lines going across. So I think I've come up with a solution, and you know, worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, I can sort of take it all off and sand it off and start again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some of this. So this is 0.5mm sheet styrene, and I've cut a very narrow strip of it. So this is sort of about, I don't know, it's less than a millimeter. And what I want to do with this is create like a border around the edge of where the intakes would be. And then I can look at using a different thickness styrene to sort of do the flaps that sort of sit in here and would be closed, you know, in the Valkyrie mode. So the first bit is to create this sort of border, and it'll probably make more sense once I've sort of got it done, but I do have a sort of a reasonably clear idea of how I'm going to do this. So the first bit is to cut a length of this, get the process sort of started. And I'm going to put a kink in it just with my fingernail, so just a bend in it, because the profile of this, you can see you've got the bend there. So the next step for me is to try and glue this on. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to get this on camera or not, because normally my head sort of would sit over the top of it, so we'll see how we go. So I'm actually going to lay a bit of extra thin down on the surface here. Yeah, it's almost the end of its life. So a new bottle of tomato extra thin, and you get quite a bit of glue in there. So if you have a look at that, you can sort of see I've got it sort of in position, but I need it to hang over the edge just a little bit, because what I want this to be is a representation of the outer edge of the intake, and it should follow the same contour as the outside. So what I want it to do is look like that. Now I will probably have to use a little bit of putty to sort of clean that up a little bit, but that's pretty much the idea of it. So let's do the other side. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it. I will need a little bit of putty in there, but you can sort of see how that looks. So the next bit is to measure out a cross member for the top and also the bottom. Okay, so there's the bottom bit done. So basically I'm creating sort of an inset that I can put some indication of the intake flaps. Alright, so it looks kind of messy at this stage, but once it's sort of cleaned up, I think it will look a lot better than the detail that was there on the kit. So I'm going to let that dry before I sort of trim off those bits hanging over the edge, and then I'll go in with a bit of putty around the sides and we'll take it from there. I've let the edge parts dry, so now I just need to trim down those leftover bits. So Let's just trim those off. Doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to do some sanding anyway. I'm going to need some putty and some sanding to clean it all up. But the next step is that I need to get some putty around those edges where you can see it's pretty rough. And certainly on the top it's a lot more obvious. So to do that, I'm going to use some Tamiya white putty, but I'm also going to thin it down a bit with some Tamiya lacquer thinner. So this is a lacquer based putty, which means you can thin it down. I just find that if you use it straight out of the tube, quite often it can be a bit tricky to sort of get into the areas you need it to. So I'll put a little bit in my tin here. Okay, so just it's a little bit, a little bit runnier. It means I'll have a bit more flexibility with the way that I apply the putty down, because I just want it along these edges here. Alright, so you can see that's pretty messy, but once that dries, I'll be able to clean all that up and sand it down and make it look good. So to give you an idea of what the intention is, so this is what it looks like when it's sort of all done and dusted. I've still got some gaps to kind of fill, but you get an idea that it makes it look like it's part of the piece, that there's that surround for that intake. Now the inside I'll be putting in some styrene strip for some for the intake flaps, but for now I'll get to this stage with the other one as well. Okay, time to do some more work on the intakes. You can see I've puttied and sanded the sides, so I've got nice clean profile there, and I've got that inset area. So I'm pretty happy with the way that's come up so far. The next thing to do is essentially cut some small strips of styrene and create the illusion of the flaps that will go in there. So what I'll be using is just some 0.25mm thick sheet styrene. So it's thinner than the stuff that I've used around the edge, so at least it'll still retain a bit of the profile when the flaps go in. And I've cut down a 1mm strip. And what I want to do is basically set up the flaps sort of all on here, get the spacing right. Just try and get them sort of pressure fit or press fit in there before I apply glue. And the reason for that is I want to get the spacing between them even across all of them. I'm not sure how many it'll take. It'll probably take 4 or 5 strips, I think. But yeah, I just want to sort of get them all in place before I actually apply the glue. So what I do is, first of all, I'm going to use some blue tack. I'm going to hold the leg in place just because it's going to make it a bit easier. I'm going to take a pen and sort of put the strip across and kind of measure where I need to cut it. So and I've got quite a long strip here, so if I mess up, it's not a big drama. I can just cut more. Now the other issue is that there's a bit of an angle in here, so interesting to sort of see. There we go, but that looks alright. That one fits okay. So I've got one sort of right in the fold, I guess you could call it. And then I just repeat the process. Okay, so I've got the flaps roughly in place where I want them, if it'll focus. So the spacing at this time is not even, but once I get some glue in there, and that glue starts to sort of set a little bit, I'll be able to sort of maneuver them around a little bit. So I'm just taking some Tamiya extra thin, just sort of dabbing it in the gaps. So there we have it. I reckon that's a lot better than what was there previously. Alright, now if I put this in place, you can see I've done both sides there. I've just put the head cannons on loosely because once they go in I think I'm going to struggle to get them out without breaking them. But now we've got the complete Valkyrie and all the seams sort of cleaned up. I won't know until I give it a grey primer coat. I'll know for sure that I've got the gaps filled, seams filled, and like those triangle details that I filled in as well. So I think I'm going to leave the video here just because I know it's been going for quite some time. So this is ready for primer, which I'll do next, but the next video will be concentrating more on the actual base and the construction of the base and what I decide to do on lighting for that. So until then, I'll catch you later.